Tonight, the breaking and historic news. President Biden says he will not seek a second term, ending his campaign and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris for the nomination. What led to this decision, including the growing calls from Biden's own party to step aside, and what this means for the election in November.
President Biden took the honorable path today, and he did it for all the right reasons. He did it because he knows that our democracy is on the line.
A special edition of the CBS Evening News starts now. Good evening. I'm Nora O'Donnell with a special one-hour edition of the CBS Evening News. Thank you for being with us. Tonight, President Joe Biden's decision not to seek re-election is sending shockwaves across the nation. At 1:46 p.m. Eastern today, the president released a letter announcing his decision to step aside after weeks of intense pressure from Democratic lawmakers and donors for the 81-year-old president to do just that. In that letter, he said, quote, "I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to step down." And then in a post at 2:13 p.m. on social media, President Biden then endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to run in his place. Harris said she will seek the nomination, adding, "Together we will fight, and together we will win." Biden is the first sitting president since Lyndon B. Johnson not to seek re-election. His party now in chaos with just 107 days until the election. We have a team of CBS News correspondents tracking these historic developments, and we're going to begin with CBS's Nancy Cordes. She's at the White House for us tonight. Nancy, good evening. What a day this has been.
Nora, CBS News has learned that the president began to come around to this decision last night with just a few members of his inner circle. Then today, he informed the rest of his senior advisors before making the announcement to the public. This was a decision that many Democrats had pushed for or predicted ever since that disastrous debate 24 days ago, when the president's health and his age were forced into the spotlight.
The historic and stunning announcement from President Biden came early this afternoon. In a letter to the American people posted on social media, he said, "While it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." The announcement threw the race into disarray. No sitting American president has dropped out of a campaign so late in the election cycle. In a subsequent post, Biden endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris.
Are we ready to fight for it?
Harris, in turn, said she was, quote, "honored to have the president's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. We have 107 days until Election Day. Together we'll fight, and together we will win." Delaware Senator and Biden ally Chris Coons said it was a hard decision for the president.
I still believe he could have beaten Donald Trump, but I also know that what he's done today is in the best interests of our nation.
A slew of political heavyweights are already backing Harris, including both Clintons and many members of Congress. Pressure had been mounting on the president to step aside. A growing number of congressional Democrats called on him to leave the race as the polls worsened, donations dropped off, and the president himself showed signs of a slowdown, both physically and verbally.
Look at the heat I'm getting because I named the Secretary of Defense a black man.
On top of all that came the president's COVID diagnosis on Wednesday, forcing him to cut short a campaign trip to Nevada. As he recovered at his beach home in Rehoboth this weekend, the calls to step down grew louder.
It is time to step aside and turn this over to a new generation. My endorsement stays until he makes that decision. I'm encouraging that. The country's encouraging it. And he has a chance to be an American hero.
Even this morning, the president's top advisors insisted he would continue to fight on.
And I want to be crystal clear. He's made a decision, and that decision is to accept the nomination and run for re-election, win re-election.
After Biden pulled out, the Republican nominee, Donald Trump, slammed him, saying he was not fit to serve from the very beginning. But the Trump campaign privately wanted Biden to stay in the race, thinking he was an easier target. They've now turned their attention to Vice President Harris, attacking her in a new ad out today.
Tonight, the entire Democratic apparatus is working to reorient the campaign and the convention around Vice President Harris. But CBS News has learned that independent Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who was until recently a Democrat, is now considering becoming a Democrat again to mount his own dark horse campaign for the nomination. Nora?
Nancy Cordes from the White House on this historic day. Nancy, thank you. And President Biden made this decision not from the White House, but from his home in Delaware, where he is still isolating, sick with COVID. CBS's Willie James Inman has been traveling with the president during the campaign. Good evening, Willie.
Good evening to you, Nora. Well, we haven't seen the president since he arrived here late on Wednesday evening after he was diagnosed with COVID-19. And it was during that night we saw the president descend slowly down the steps of Air Force One. Now we're learning that sources close to the president grew furious with the increased calls for him to step aside while he recovered from COVID. But ultimately, the president said he decided to bow out of the race for the good of the Democratic Party and the country. Now, earlier today, the president's doctor released a statement saying he is still experiencing mild symptoms, but his condition has significantly improved. And nor we don't yet know when the president will leave his beach home here in Rehoboth, Delaware. But in that statement he said to the American people, he said he would address the public in the coming days. Nora.
We are expecting to hear from him soon. Willie James Inman, thank you very much. President Biden today offering a full-throated endorsement for Vice President Kamala Harris. The highest-ranking woman ever in American politics is a former U.S. Senator and California Attorney General. CBS News contributor Ed Gordon has more on Harris's background and her place in history.
Kamala Harris burst onto the political scene. She broke barriers as the first Black and South Asian woman district attorney of San Francisco and Attorney General of California before entering national politics.
We know this is the first open Senate seat we've had in almost a quarter of a century.
In 2016, she won a Senate seat in California, and it didn't take long for her presence to be felt in Washington.
Can you give me a yes or no answer,
in the closed briefing? Well, it's not a short answer, Senator. The answer
It is either you are willing to do that or not.
Presidential buzz grew quickly. She made it official in 2019.
I stand before you today to announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
Her record as a prosecutor in California at times was at odds with the direction of the party, and her momentum faded.
It is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude, that I am suspending our campaign today.
However, she would soon be on a new campaign with Joe Biden.
I picked the right person to join me as the next Vice President of the United States of America, and that's Senator Kamala Harris.
And in November of 2020, Joe Biden was elected the 46th president.
We did it. We did it, Joe.
With Kamala Harris making history as the first female, Black and South Asian vice president.
I, Kamala Davy Harris, do solemnly swear.
She initially focused on the immigration crisis, but found her voice when Roe versus Wade was overturned.
And when Congress passes a law that restores the reproductive freedoms of Roe, our President Joe Biden will sign it.
And as the 2024 presidential election began to heat up, she stayed the course.
We will win re-election. There is too much at stake, and the American people know it.
Even after President Biden's debate performance against former President Donald Trump, she stood by Biden.
Joe Biden is our nominee. We beat Trump once, and we're going to beat him again.
And President Biden stood by her.
Folks, I know what a black job is. It's the Vice President of the United States.
But as President Biden drops out of the race, the focus is now on Vice President Harris. Will she be able to win the nomination and make history again? Ed Gordon, CBS News, Denver.
And we didn't have to wait long for Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump's reaction in a phone interview. He told our Robert Costa that the President Biden's withdrawal from the race is, quote, a shock to the country. Donald Trump also lashed out on social media, writing that Biden is, quote, not fit to serve and never was. For more analysis on this moment, let's bring in Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. Robert, what did Donald Trump say?
Former President Donald Trump spoke with me on the phone. He said that this does not change his view of the race, that he is still going to run a campaign against the Biden administration. When I asked him, are you willing and ready to debate Vice President Harris? He said he is not at this moment because he is not sure yet whether she will ultimately emerge as the Democratic nominee. He said he is prepared to have effectively a political war against Vice President Harris or whomever emerges as the Democratic nominee. He's not pulling back at all. He said this is a shock to the country. He also believes that Democrats forced President Biden out. So he was stirring the pot a bit in our conversation about how President Biden ultimately made this decision. And many Biden confidants tell me this was a painful one for the president.
Margaret Brennan, we still don't know who the Democratic nominee will be, but the president, Joe Biden, has thrown his support behind the vice president. The Clintons have thrown their support. Quickly, a number of Democratic lawmakers are speaking out on her behalf. But this is a critical period the next week. What does she need to do?
Well, besides just being able to order merchandise and get the signs ready and get all the mechanics of the campaign up, she needs to make a selection that will help to offset whatever concerns there may be about, once again, having a woman at the top of the ticket, Hillary Clinton, fresh in the minds of many Democrats. And they see that Democrats have had a problem with attracting votes from men in particular. That is front of mind. There is also front of mind for many Democrats urging Harris to focus on key states like Pennsylvania and Arizona, places where they could make a key selection for a vice presidential running mate for her. That is the first really big decision she needs to make by the end of the month, I'm told. And from some of my Democratic sources who point out you need energy and you need unity to win a campaign. They now have energy, and they need to see that unity around a ticket.
If she becomes the Democratic nominee, how does this change the debate about the substance of this contest, about the policy issues? What changes?
Well, you have generational shift, by the way. We no longer have an 81-year-old Democrat running against a 78-year-old Republican. You have a 59-year-old woman, the first woman of color. That changes. That might excite some of those young voters that Democrats were concerned about because they saw that lack of energy and enthusiasm for Joe Biden on some key issues that were weaknesses for him. As you heard one of our analysts there say, the disruptor, the war in Gaza, it resonated not just with Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. It was resonant with Black Americans in particular. It was a negative for the president that he didn't come out and express more empathy. She has. She's been very keyed in on that, specifically when she goes and speaks to young voters. The issue of reproductive health care has been the strength. Joe Biden has really leaned on her to be the messenger, not just because of her gender, but because she is very comfortable being a prosecutor and arguing this is not just about abortion. As she would argue, this put your own personal religious beliefs. You don't have to sacrifice them. This is also about IVF. It is about safe health care for women. She's going to prosecute that case, and Democrats think that is a winning issue for them.
But she can't do it just yet. My top Democratic sources say she has a lot to do between now and the convention. Can she actually unify the Democratic Party? We have seen a cascade of Democrats endorse her today, but not everybody is endorsing Vice President Harris at this moment. Senator Peter Welch of Vermont told you on CBS that he wants to see what he called a truncated process. There's also a lot of risk with vetting a vice presidential nominee in such a short window. Think about 1972 when Senator George McGovern had Thomas Eagleton on the ticket. Eagleton had to drop off because he wasn't fully vetted. Democrats are nervous. Will Vice President Harris have the political room to assert herself, or will President Biden be hovering over her shoulder at every term? Democrats now are in a vulnerable position, but also they feel a positive position to turn it back to the issues they want to talk about. But they need to really establish her as the nominee before she can actually take on Trump and make that case.
And this breaking news just in: the popular governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, endorsing Kamala Harris. He is popular among Republican voters, Trump supporters in that state. We have so much more to cover. This is a political first. No sitting American president has dropped out of the race this late in the election cycle, and voters are already weighing in on President Biden's decision to step aside. We're going to have more on that as this special edition of the CBS Evening News continues right after this. In the aftermath of President Biden's decision to drop out of the race, we're hearing from voters on what they think. Here's CBS's Jim Axelrod.
In this summer of surprises, this was another weekend of bold-faced headlines to be digested by voters like Richard Freeman in Ohio, a Democrat.
I think it's a good decision. I think he didn't have a chance against Trump. Too many people were concerned about his age, which I was too.
This retired bar owner in Michigan had wanted to see the president drop out ever since the debate.
Yes. After seeing him, how bad he's been failing health-wise, I think it's a good thing that he did drop out.
The latest CBS poll of registered voters overwhelmingly showed most Americans did not think Mr. Biden has the mental and cognitive health to serve as president.
Well, I can't say that I'm too fully surprised, but I mean, I honestly didn't think that was going to happen, but just hearing it now, it makes sense.
From coast to coast, from suburban New York City.
I'm disappointed because I felt like he was pushed out, and I really felt like the Democrats should have stood behind him.
To Democrats in Philadelphia.
I think it's a good decision. I think they'll be better suited by some new blood that will come to the Democratic Party.
To Republicans sweating it out in Phoenix, there were a lot of feelings about Joe Biden ending his campaign, but not a lot of surprise.
I just didn't feel like he was mentally capable to run this race. And also, I mean, yes, I am Republican, but I also felt like it was also to a disadvantage for him and his party to also stay running.
It is an old rule of politics that Americans don't really start focusing on presidential elections until Labor Day. Not this cycle. After the last 2 July weekends, voters would have every reason to wonder what the next one is going to bring. Nora?
It has been quite a month of news. Jim Axelrod, thank you so much. Who's on the short list to be Vice President Harris's running mate if she wins the Democratic nomination? That's next as our special coverage continues here on CBS. Vice President Kamala Harris is the most likely contender to be the Democratic nominee, and her first major decision will be to pick a running mate. CBS's Weijia Jiang now with some possible names that could join her on the ticket. Hi there, Weijia.
Good evening, Nora. Tonight, Vice President Harris is here in Washington, D.C., but she has not made any public appearances all day. Democratic sources and fundraisers tell us one of the biggest questions they are asking is who can fill the void that President Biden will leave behind on the ticket. Vice President Kamala Harris returned to Washington Saturday night after a packed week on the campaign trail, now likely weighing the question of who might return with her as her running mate. Names have already started to surface, including Democratic governors who could appeal to swing state voters. Roy Cooper of North Carolina.
North Carolina welcomes back Vice President Kamala Harris to Greensboro to get ready to defeat Donald Trump in November.
Who just stumped with Harris in his state on Thursday. Pennsylvania's Josh Shapiro and Andy Beshear of Kentucky. Harris could also tap a member of the Biden cabinet. Senator Amy Klobuchar says there are several great options.
Now we're going to have a whole new game, an entirely new ticket. And I think, again, you want to have someone for this job that, one, she trusts. We know how important that is, how good presidents and vice presidents of both parties have worked together in the past. Number two, you want to have someone who knows how to govern, who could step into the job.
Harris, a former district attorney from San Francisco, has a liberal voting record that could be balanced with a more moderate VP pick. Some have speculated whether Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan could make the first all-woman ticket in history.
I love Gretchen Whitmer. She's been my friend not just for a few years, but for a decade. But I think she means it when she says she's not a candidate for any office this year.
Vice President Harris is scheduled to campaign in Wisconsin, Indianapolis, and Massachusetts this week. Tonight, the chair of the Biden campaign told all staff during a call that Harris is the nominee. Nora.
All right, Weijia Zhang outside the U.S. Naval Observatory where the vice president lives. Thank you. And we'll have more of our special coverage of this extraordinary day in American politics. Stay with us. The news today has reverberated around the world. President Biden is dropping out of the campaign, significant for so many reasons, including that there are only 107 days until Election Day. No president has ever left the race so late in the campaign cycle. Every newspaper headline blaring the news from Seattle to New York to Mumbai, and every television station from coast to coast tuned to the news, with millions watching the headlines, are clear. The news and what it will lead to is extremely uncertain. We're going to have more on what this means for the Democratic Party and for the nation coming up as our special coverage continues on the CBS Evening News. Welcome back to this special one-hour edition of the CBS Evening News. I'm Nora O'Donnell in the nation's capital. President Biden's decision to stand down from the presidential race is sending shockwaves across the country. This momentous announcement has pushed the 2024 presidential election into uncharted territory. It's the first time in more than a half a century that a sitting president has decided to not seek a second term. Former President Lyndon Johnson was the last president to do this during the turbulent year of 1968. CBS's Nancy Cortez joins us to give us some perspective on this memorable day in Washington. And Nancy, what can you tell us about what we have learned about how the president came to this historic decision?
Well, it all happened this weekend, Nora. He was at his home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, recovering from COVID, with just a few members of his inner circle around him, including his deputy chief of staff, Annie Tomasini, and two of his longtime senior advisors, Steve Ricchetti and Mike Donnellan. We're told that Biden began to come to this decision last night. Then he spoke to the vice president several times today. He informed his chief of staff, Jeff Zients, and his campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon. And then at 1:45 this afternoon, he held a conference call to inform the rest of his senior advisors. Just a minute or two after that, his announcement went out to the American public. And then half an hour later, he announced his endorsement of his vice president, Kamala Harris. So all of this was carefully choreographed, Nora, to ensure an orderly transition of support from him to her. And it appears that most Democrats have followed his lead.
And Nancy, what are we hearing about the vice president? How does she plan to secure this nomination? And how is she planning to respond to what are already these incoming attacks from Donald Trump?
She's going to have to move quickly. We're told she spent this afternoon here in D.C. calling around to various Democratic members of Congress to ensure their support. And what we've seen already is that many of the members who were calling on President Biden to step aside have already thrown their support behind her. So barring some major unforeseen circumstance, it appears very unlikely at this point that she's going to face any kind of serious challenge from a mainstream Democrat. And instead, she's mostly got to look ahead to the general election. She was expected to campaign in the Midwest this week and in Indianapolis. It's unclear if all of that is now going to have to change. Obviously, everything involving this campaign is going to change. There were meetings taking place at every level of the campaign, at the Democratic National Committee, all day today as they reorient this campaign around the vice president.
Nancy Cortez at the White House with that new information. Thank you. Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland was one of the key Democratic lawmakers calling on President Biden to reconsider staying in the race. Representative Raskin was also a member of the January 6th committee, and he joins us now for reaction. Good to see you, Congressman. You were one of the first. You put out a letter likening the president to a tired pitcher in a baseball game. Do you think he made the right decision?
Well, he's more like a star pitcher with a tired arm. But in any event, he's been one of the great presidents of American history. He's done extraordinary things in office. He's a great patriot, and he's a great leader, too, because a great leader makes way for great leaders and helps to raise them and nurture them. And that's what he's done with Vice President Harris. And we're going to see extraordinary unity and focus in our party getting behind President Biden's choice of Vice President Harris for president. I think people are going to rally around his vision and his strategy for having us beat the autocrats and the monarchs and the theocrats that have rallied around Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. This is the election of our lifetime, and Joe Biden is going to be right at the center of it as president of the United States.
You have been at the forefront of efforts in Congress to prosecute Donald Trump, the impeachments, and January 6th. How does this decision change the contours of this presidential race?
Well, I think you put your finger on it. Kamala Harris is a prosecutor. She made her career as a prosecutor. Donald Trump is a convicted felon. Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, said that Trump was going to be America's Hitler. He said that he was cultural heroin for the working class. Now he's a pusher. I think America is realizing that J.D. Vance has no convictions at all, but Donald Trump has at least 34 convictions right now, and he can share some of those with J.D. Vance. In any event, the framework of the race is clear at this point. Kamala Harris is going to prosecute this case for democracy and freedom across the country. I saw her speak yesterday. She will put abortion rights, birth control, IVF, the rights of women, the rights of healthcare, voting rights, democracy, right at the center of this campaign. And she will prosecute the case against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. She's going to be an extraordinarily powerful candidate.
And are you convinced the Democratic Party will unite around her quickly?
I know the Democratic Party will unite for victory in November. And I am 1,000% convinced that we will be 1,000% unified and focused. The stakes are just too great. And our great president, Joe Biden, leads the way in terms of patriotism and everybody putting nation first. That's what this is about. And we're talking about a ticket now where J.D. Vance is saying, pull the plug on the people of Ukraine. He doesn't give a damn about the people of Ukraine. They're on Putin's side. They're on the side of the dictators and the strongmen and the autocrats. And it is the Democratic Party, the People's Party, that is the party of democracy and freedom. And I think with Joe Biden as the heart and soul of our party and Kamala Harris coming out swinging against this ticket, we've got the recipe for victory. And I've been to 20 states campaigning for Democrats all over the country, from Kentucky to California to Nevada, Arizona, Florida. The Democrats are fired up, and my phone and my email are blowing up now with people saying, where do I give money? Where do I get involved? It's an all hands on deck moment.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, good to have you here. Thank you very much.
You bet. You bet.
And we're joined now by CBS's John Dickerson. Good evening, John. Good to talk to you. What do you make of this memorable day?
Well, first, just starting with President Biden, a presidential decision, which means it's made alone. The stakes are high, and the decision is not an easy one, and just an extraordinary human crucible that he went through. Now, a set of presidential decisions face Vice President Kamala Harris if, in fact, she becomes the party's nominee. What do I mean by that? I mean, she's going to be deluged with options and choices and decisions to be made. They're going to be high stakes. She's going to have to make them quickly, and she's going to have to stay focused. You know, she's going to get 1,000 suggestions and have 1,000 opportunities, but her ability to focus and keep this campaign where it's supposed to be, while at the same time picking who her running mate is, if in fact she becomes the nominee, those will be two things that will be quite hard to stay focused on. And Congressman Raskin was just talking about all the things she's going to do. That's if it's in laboratory conditions. It's not going to be in laboratory conditions. This is going to be a very hectic time. And so to prosecute the campaign in the way the congressman was suggesting would be a remarkable act of focus and ability. And she's about to face that test.
And what about that test, John? Because you and I have covered a number of presidential campaigns. The amount of scrutiny that one person faces, it is the toughest job in the world, and the campaign to get there is unlike any other.
It is, and Kamala Harris is going to face a whole new set of attacks. The Trump team knows how to attack people, for sure, and so she'll be having to manage all that, and sometimes the choice will not be what actions to take, but what to resist doing, and that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. You know, the old cliche is that they're building an airplane while they're trying to fly it, and that's in fact what they're trying to do here. Build a campaign operation. Yes, one's in place, but Kamala Harris has totally different biorhythms and a different approach to things. The campaign's going to have to get in sync while it tries to prosecute the case. And I would finish on this point, which is this is an extraordinary opportunity. People, 2/3 of the country said they didn't want the choice between Biden and Trump. Now people are paying attention. While those eyes are wide open and looking at the screen, it's a chance for a campaign to seize that moment. And that moment won't come back again. So the question is, does the campaign and does Vice President Harris have the skills to seize the moment?
John Dickerson, thank you very much. The president's son, Hunter Biden, weighing in. Plus, President Biden's decision to pass the torch caps a remarkable 50-year run in American politics. We'll have an in-depth look at his legacy. That's next. Today, former President Barack Obama called President Biden one of America's most consequential presidents and a patriot of the highest order. Our chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, looks back on Biden's more than 50 years of public service.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
Joe Biden's presidency began on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, where only days before, America bore witness to insurrection.
We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was born in 1942. Biden played football at the University of Delaware and attended law school at Syracuse University. By 1972,
if you like what you see, help me out. If not, vote for the other fellow.
He was elected to the United States Senate as a long shot, tell it like it is, 29-year-old. Weeks later, his wife Nelia and their daughter were killed in a traffic accident that also injured sons Beau and Hunter. A single-father senator, Biden commuted from Wilmington to Washington aboard Amtrak to be home with his kids at night. He met Jill Jacobs, a teacher, on a blind date in 1975. They married 2 years later. His 2008 White House campaign went nowhere.
The vast majority of the people in Iowa haven't made up their mind yet.
When they did,
Joe Biden!
Barack Obama named Biden his running mate. In the White House, Biden oversaw stimulus spending and jumped ahead of the president by endorsing gay marriage.
What this is all about is a simple proposition. Who do you love?
Biden told President Obama to wait for better confirmation before launching the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Memorably, he said this about the passage of Obamacare. Biden passed on another run for the presidency in 2016 after his son Beau died of brain cancer. In 2020, Biden made history by picking California Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate, the first woman of color nominated by a major party.
She's ready to do this job on day one.
That November, Biden defeated President Trump by 7 million votes. In his first 100 days, Mr. Biden accelerated vaccine distribution and strong-armed a $2 trillion COVID relief plan through a Congress with slender Democratic majorities.
The Honorable Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Biden appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court.
Okay, here we go.
And signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill into law.
Bravo.
However, a chaotic withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, coupled with inflation concerns and doubts about his comparatively lenient border policies, yielded unrelenting low approval ratings. Throughout his bid for re-election, Biden fought hard and spent tens of millions of dollars just to try to stay tied in the polls with former President Trump. After what many in his campaign and top Democrats regarded as a disastrous first debate performance, Biden could not stop the erosion of support among lawmakers and top donors. After ignoring pressure to drop out for more than 3 weeks, Biden announced his exit from the race shortly after the Republican National Convention. Biden frequently embraced optimism for America, and at times it sounded like his own internal fight against those who bet against him.
We are the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. And let's stay together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
Biden, in the end, was persuaded to preserve his legacy rather than risk defeat for himself and Democrats nationwide. Steeped in the hard realities of Washington, Biden learned that loyalty and power, even when you are president and the presumptive party nominee, can slip away when the political tides and those closest turn against you.
That was Major Garrett, and we'll have more reaction on this extraordinary day in presidential politics. That's next. President Biden's family reacting to his decision to leave the race tonight. This statement from his son, Hunter, saying, "Over a lifetime, I have witnessed him absorb the pain of countless everyday Americans who he's given his personal phone number to because he wanted them to call him when they were hurting. That unconditional love has been his North Star as a president and as a parent. I ask all Americans to join me tonight in doing the same. Thank you, Mr. President. I love you, Dad." And we're joined now by CBS News political contributor Ashley Etienne, a former senior advisor to President Biden and Vice President Harris, and Republican presidential campaign manager Terry Sullivan. Welcome to both of you. Ashley, the vice president is not yet the Democratic nominee. Do you think any other candidates will come forward, or is this hers?
I mean, the question before the party is, why would you dispense with someone who's brought the country out of COVID and now has built the strongest economy in the world? Why would you dispense with someone who's built this record that Democrats are running on all over the country, from guns to health care to infrastructure to climate? Why would you get rid of that person? There is no sensical response to that question. So I don't anticipate that there will be anyone that decides to run against her. And if someone does, I think we should question that person and ask them why would they decide to do such a thing?
And Terry, you've run a presidential campaign before. How are they changing things now with a potentially new Democratic nominee?
Yeah, they're in a wait and see mode because the person who thinks there should be an open process is Barack Obama, who issued that in a statement. So he's not ready to just make it Kamala
Barack
Harris.
Obama's not the head of the party, though.
No, he's not. Right. He's not. But I'm just saying that there is an open process. So now the Republicans are in a wait and see. The Trump campaign is in a wait and see kind of position who they're going to be running against. And so it's a tough spot because indecision here. And while the Democrats sort this process out.
But the Donald Trump campaign is not doing a wait and see. They were already putting up an ad against Kamala Harris. And let me ask you about that, Ashley, because she is going to face some tough attacks, some nasty attacks. How will she respond to that? And how do you think this debate will be joined?
Well, I can say, I work for the vice president, so I was there day one when I think the punches were coming at her fast and furious, even harder than what I think she might be able to experience going forward. And she, I think, learned a lot of lessons in that moment. I think that toughened her up. Now, one thing you have to remember, Nora, she's been the first at every job she's ever had, from the AG to senator. I mean, she's always been the first in her job. So she knows what it's like to take that incoming and then fight back. But here's the key. Here's the advantage that she actually has. I think it is going to be her gender in this next election, in that the internal polls within the Biden campaign are showing that the key constituency they need to win are going to be these Republican suburban women. They don't like these type of antics. They don't like someone like Donald Trump coming after women. And here's the other thing. She's going to be on strong footing. Now this race is going to come down to, I think, this attack that Republicans are having on women. She's been prosecuting that case like no one else has. And it's yielding dividends for her in the polls among that broad coalition that Biden built in 2020 to win.
Terry, we did see Donald Trump lost the last presidential election because of suburban women.
Well, and he ran against a woman before and beat her in Hillary.
Well, it's a different world then. We didn't know Donald Trump was in no
hold on, though. But yes, so he's done it before and he can do it again. But the reality is she's got to defend the same record that Joe Biden did. And so the question is he doing so bad polling because of his age, or was it because of his record? Yeah, and so that's what we're going to have to sort out here, because she's got to defend the border crisis. She's got to defend the inflation, the same things that Joe Biden had to defend. And so that's going to be the real question here. is she up to that test? And she has not proven to be a super strong candidate. When she ran for president in 2020, she dropped out before there was even the first vote. So I do think this is going to be a competitive campaign. If she is the nominee for the Democrats, I think the Trump campaign is going to be able to really, really do well against her.
Ashley, some news tonight. Former President Trump told our Robert Costa that he's calling off this planned debate in September because it was supposed to be against Joe Biden. He says, well, the Democrats don't even know who their nominee is going to be. But what would a debate, Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, look like?
I actually think he's scared. I mean, I think that's why he's saying that he won't debate her. I think he's scared. I mean, have you seen those clips of her grilling during those Judiciary Committee hearings, from Kavanaugh to other witnesses? I think he's absolutely scared. But here's going to be the key, I think, is Donald Trump is a horrible debater. I think the more that people see of Donald Trump, his numbers go down, especially with that 1% to 2% that's going to make the difference. So that's another reason why he would want to back out of this particular debate, is because he actually doesn't want to continue to keep exposing himself and really tanking his numbers among those key constituencies.
Ashley Etienne, Terry Sullivan, great to have this discussion. Thank you so much.
You.
And we'll have some final thoughts on this monumental day in Washington. That's next. CBS News has learned that Vice President Harris spoke with the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries today. That's according to a person familiar with their conversation. And that news comes at the end of a historic day, but just the beginning of a never-before-seen election. Joe Biden saying for the good of his party and the good of American democracy, he is not seeking re-election to the presidency. The president making the difficult decision to put himself second and the people of the nation first. The 81-year-old who has served this country for more than 50 years is, regardless of your political viewpoint, making a sacrifice far greater than any he's made in the past. The eyes of today see contention and controversy, but the eyes of history may look differently at this day. The 46th president, who remains president for 5 more months, has now put an exclamation point on his chapter in history, which continues to change before our very eyes. And that wraps up this special 1-hour edition of the CBS Evening News. I'm Norah O'Donnell. Good night.